iterations, we work primarily on just transportation. And the exciting thing to me about this bipartisan infrastructure law, or otherwise known as the Infrastructure and, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, is that it broadened the conversation beyond just transportation to all of these other things. And I think that's a really good thing. I think it's a time in this country when we needed to do that. What to me is a little bit scary, if you will, is that I don't know that we heard our speakers earlier, what's the future like? I have 5 kids and 13 grandkids. And my 16-year-old granddaughter tells me, Mama, we only have a decade. We only have a decade. If we don't make a difference in this decade, I might not have a future. And I believe her. So I have a sense of urgency that I haven't had for a while. I think we only have a decade. The good thing is we have this infrastructure law, only 5 years, has 10 years of advance authorizations, and it's got a lot of money. Use it well and use it right, that decade may be enough. So I'm hoping that it will be. It's a partnership. The other exciting thing to me about this bill is that it's the first time at the federal level that it's really recognized that state departments of transportation can't do this alone. Previously, the infrastructure bills typically gave most of the money to the DOTs. Gave a little bit of money to transit organizations and very, very little bit to Amtrak. And almost all of it went to DOTs. And DOTs had a few competitive grant programs that maybe the locals could get their hands on. This is a whole different ballgame. There's a lot of money for DOTs, and we need to talk about how they can use it more effectively and how we can help them use it more effectively, but there's also a lot of money for locals. There's a lot of money for transit. There's a lot of money for rail. And I think it's that partnership that will allow us to use this decade to really make the difference that we need to make. So what's in the bill? Like I said, there's a whole bunch of stuff in it, much more than transportation, but about half of it, 1.2 billion overall, about half of it is transportation. 1.2 trillion, sorry. You forget the trillions and billions when you're talking these big numbers. So a lot of money for DOTs, a lot of money for transit, and more money for airports and ports. Those are certainly something we have to pay attention to. Passenger rail, something I've been working on a lot the last year or two, and there's 750% more money in rail than there's been previously. It's a big deal. We have EV charging, so we're beginning to move our transportation system to a more sustainable fuel source. On the other side, there's water systems and high-speed internet access and power infrastructure. If we're going to do EVs, we got to have the power infrastructure to handle it. Resilient infrastructure. Parts of this bill allow the DOTs to go in and say, what are evacuation routes? Is this a road that's going to get flooded? How are we going to avoid those things? And then a lot of other investments in other environmental stuff. So how is it going to be distributed? Like I said, a lot of it goes to transportation. All that greenish teal color there is transportation stuff. Most of that to highways. You can see the biggest block goes to the state DOT still. However, there's a fair amount for the rest of us. And again, that's a really big deal. I'll make sure that you guys get this presentation emailed, so don't try to write anything down. You can later. So if we go just into the transportation portion of it, 643 billion. That doesn't include the EV, by the way. They have put that in the environment bucket. I put it in the transportation bucket. Of that 643 billion, 460 some goes to state DOTs. 350 is for them to use, and the rest of that is for them to grant out. And then the rest is programs that go directly to local governments through the US DOT. It's a new thing, it's a really big deal. It's hard for all of us to be able to use effectively because you have to apply for it. You have to have matches for it. You have to have plans. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how all of you can access some of that money by getting into some of those plans. So FAST Act versus BIL. So I told you I've been involved in this since ICE-T T21, Safety Lou, MAP 21, FAST Act. FAST Act was a big deal. It was a big jump from those previous ones. Now look at the big deal that this one is. You can't see the rail infrastructure over there, but it's a big line compared to the little tiny bit that was there before. And it's these increases that can make the difference in this next decade or can continue business as usual. And I think it's going to be up to us, which it does. And up to us to talk to our state DOTs, up to us to talk to our communities, up to us to make sure we have plans in place that we use it well and use it effectively. The highway formula resources, this is the part that goes straight to the state DOT. It doesn't include the competitive grant programs. This is the $350 billion they get to use. It still has new programs that focus on connecting communities, improving mobility, improving access to economic opportunity, critical bridge repair, reducing carbon emissions, and increasing resilience. In addition, there's a lot of competitive programs that also do these things, and so we can build the partnership with these state DOTs and do these things side by side if we have the plans in place that allow us to do that. On the other hand, if the idea is, look, we have more money, let's build more of the stuff that we've been building for the last 40 years, we're going to get further behind instead of further ahead because it is a lot of money. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm sounding that note of caution because I am concerned that without good decision-making, without good guidance, this money could be spent to widen roads all over the place and not make quality of life any better, to induce traffic and not make traffic evaporate. I love that, traffic evaporation. I want to learn, I want to make that happen in my community. To create more reasons to travel by car and make it harder to travel by bike or foot or transit. So again, this really is a time of urgency, and I really hope that we all take that to heart because this planet is burning up right now, and if we don't make some changes, we'll not be able to leave it for our grandchildren. That's how I feel about it at this point. So the local government opportunities are the eligibilities in the Act for both local governments, metropolitan planning organizations, tribes, and other public authorities, and that includes transit authorities and highway districts, and you name it. There's carve-outs specifically for tribes this time, which is also, I think, a really exciting thing. They're a small enough group of entities around the country that I think, and many of them are getting excited about it, there's a real opportunity for them to explore innovations. Because for the first time, instead of competing against all of us for these pots of funding, they've got a pot of funding that's set aside for them. And they can try some things that they might not have otherwise done. So the Highway Trust Fund, here's another little factoid that I always like to bring up. People still contend that the roadway system is a user-pays system. In Idaho, we have a gas tax. We also have $80 million in sales tax that we give to transportation. That's certainly not a user-pay system. That's a general fund. At the federal level, it's even more. About 200 billion comes in through the gas tax, and another 105 to 110 billion is general fund. So about a third of the money that we're spending in this highway program is income tax, sales tax, general fund money that comes from everybody. And I begun telling this story. I have a brother-in-law who's a year older than me. He's lived in the suburbs his whole life. He just bought a new truck because he also has an RV and was looking really forward in retirement to traveling around in his truck and RV, and he had a stroke. And he lost vision on the left side of his vision. And can't drive again, ever. And he's in a place where it's really, really difficult for him to get anywhere without driving. So he's suddenly, at retirement age, dependent on somebody else to do everything. Is that really the kind of world we want to build for people? So when we say people love driving, he loves driving. I love driving. But I also like being able to, really, really love being able to get places when I need to get them and have access to the things I need to have access to. So the system that we can build with this Highway Trust Fund is a system for everyone. The money comes from everyone, and what we build with it should serve everyone. So you can see more than half of this is the National Highway Performance Program. That's the general money that goes to the DOTs so that they can maintain the roadways we have and do the planning, do the administration, all of those things, as well as build new roads. About a quarter of it goes to the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. That program goes to regional MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, and they use it as seed money, typically, not all of the money, on projects that their metropolitan planning organization decides should get built. And so this is a pot of money that all of you can impact pretty dramatically. Right now, 85% of that block grant is going for maintaining roads in Ada County. 15% goes to transit and walking and biking. But that's a policy decision by the board, and it can be changed with enough input from enough people to say, you know, our priorities are different than that now. Maybe we should be spending more of that on walking and biking and transit. Lots of other smaller programs, including the National Highway Safety Program, alternatives like Safe Routes to School, transportation alternatives. So some of these programs still flow through the Highway Trust Fund formula to the state DOTs and then get granted out to locals. These are mostly the smaller ones up in the corner, not the big one. And some of them are going directly this time to USDOT, who's then granting them out through competitive programs. So a little bit different landscape, and that's why it's so complicated to participate as we look at how to do that. So a little bit more detail on where the funding's going. 87% is these formula programs, and 13% are these discretionary ones. And then, sorry, my phone is, I have my phone hooked up to my hearing aids, and sometimes it beeps at me. It just did that, so I'm sorry, I got distracted by it. So in this bill, and like I told you at the beginning, I'm not going to detail on everything in this bill. I want to kind of set the table. I'm going to give you some resources that you guys can dig in deep detail. It's so immense that for one thing, I couldn't cover it all, and for another, I wouldn't do justice to the things I covered. So, but having said that, there's a few things I do want to go into a little bit of detail on. One of those things is the local access to competitive funding. There's a couple of new programs. One of those is called Safe Streets for All. How many of you heard of that program? Okay, it's based on Vision Zero. It's based on building roadways for all of the users to be safe. And if you don't have a plan for how to do that, if you don't have a Vision Zero plan, you can apply to do that plan. If you do have a plan, you can apply to build the things in that plan. So if you don't have a plan today and you would like to have a Vision Zero plan or a Safe Streets for All plan, there will be a new round of this. The first round of it, the applications went in August, but the next round of it will be available next year. And again, if you don't have a plan, I would suggest you look into applying for a plan. If you do have a plan, I would suggest that you figure out which of the things in your program you would like to get built and apply for those, because it's both. It's both planning and infrastructure. That's another new thing in this bill. Previously, especially for locals, they'd say, well, you do the plan and then we'll give you money to build it. Well, I've worked with a lot of small communities around Idaho, and finding the money to do the plan can be a really big deal. And so this bill has a lot of opportunities to actually get the federal government to help you pay for the planning. You still have to match it, but at least it's a lot better than it used to be. The other programs that I think are most used by the locals include the RAISE grant. Used to be Tiger, then it was Build, now it's RAISE. Idaho got a bunch of these this year, $30 million worth, including walking and biking in Nampa, and a planning one for Ada County, including transit infrastructure in Boise and also in the Wood River Valley. So these are grants that our congressional delegation who voted for this bill has a lot of interest in making sure Idaho communities get. So you should know that our two senators voted yes on this bill. It was a big deal. They got a lot of pushback for that. And they voted yes because they know how important it is to Idaho communities to have access. So if you do decide to apply for these, know that and work with their staff people, because their staff people will work to make sure that your application gets looked at fully, okay? So the RAISE grants are a big deal. Infra is another one that is mostly for freight. But if you have a place in your community, I'm thinking of Genesee in my head right now, where they have a big freight depot for the wheat trucks that load them on the train. And it's in between the ball fields and the school and the rest of the community. This is a grant that could be used to bridge that gap. For instance, it's not just to move freight, it's to make freight intermodal and interactive in the community. Safe routes to school and transportation alternatives. The transportation alternatives program is up from $2 billion to $7.2 billion, and that includes safe route to school. And so again, if you have a walking and biking infrastructure project, or if you want to do education and encouragement around safe routes, this is the program to use. You all should have gotten a handout. I printed it because I knew you wouldn't be able to read this, but I wanted you to see how many of these programs there are. These are not all of them, actually, but these are the ones that I think are most applicable in Idaho to this audience. These are all of the places that you could compete. And I'm going to give you some resources in just a second about how to do that. But look at these. These are all things that I think possibly could be used in Idaho communities. So USDOT has this really great site that has resources on almost all of these programs. It has information about what the program is, how to apply for it, when the next round will come out. It's called the USDOT Navigator. So there's the URL is at the bottom over there. I've pulled out just the 5 that get used the most. If you look at their metrics, these are the 5 that the people go to, but there are about 15 of these links if you go to that Navigator page. Everything from an overview of the funding itself to how the bill was written, to understanding federal match requirements. This is the page that has the resources for all of you to use if you're interested in actually applying for some of these. USDOT knows that many of you have never applied for a grant before. You don't have staff. If you do have staff, it's still a big lift to get through all the federal requirements and understand what's needed to make these applications happen. So they started a program called the Thriving Communities Program. And I know the woman who runs it. She's an incredibly talented transportation planner. She knows this stuff really well and has put together a program to help communities get ready for these grants. If you're interested, you have to put in becoming one of their communities. So if you get chosen to be one of their communities, they will give you free technical assistance over a 2-year period to figure out all of the opportunities in your community and then help you through the grant process so you can get grants written for those particular programs that they identify would work. The letter of interest is due on December 6th of this year. They'll choose a number of communities, I can't remember exactly how many, and then next year they'll choose another cohort and another cohort. But if you're interested in getting some help on how to do this, this would be a great opportunity. If you're a member of the National League of Cities, they also have a program funded by the Berg Foundation called the Infrastructure Hub. So if your city is a member of AIC and NLC, you have access to that program. And it's a similar thing. They've chosen a cohort of cities and they're providing technical assistance to get ready to apply for these grants. If you're a rural community, there's also this great competitive funding application toolkit that the USDOT put together, and there's the URL for it. Now I'm going to switch gears. I have just a few minutes. I wanted to talk briefly about some of the other programs. So transit also received significant funding increase. $108 billion over 5 years. That's a lot of money. And a lot of it's flowing directly through formula to transit organizations, about $70 billion. And then there's a new, I want to call it a tactic by Congress called advance authorization. So they've added money to the bill that isn't within the 5-year period, but they're saying beyond that 5-year period, we're authorizing more money to be spent. So there's advance authorization in the bill. We'll see if that tactic works. It requires support by subsequent Congresses, but it might, because a lot of people voted for it. And then a new increase in just the authorized appropriations. So here's the line for FAST Act funding versus bipartisan infrastructure law on transit. The cool thing about the transit funding, they are the new eligibilities that they've provided. So transit organizations can now build sidewalks. They can be the applicant for some of these other competitive grant programs and use some of their federal money for match, depending on the program, not all of them, but a few of them. Work with your transit organization. FTA has set some priorities on this. One is safety. Transit safety hasn't been great in the last few years, so they're really concerned about that. And that includes safety in getting to transit, so the walking and biking and crossings. One is modernization. That includes both the buses and the bus facilities, so electric buses. One is climate change, and that again is electric buses, looking for ways to get more people onto transit and really make a difference. And as with all of these federal programs, I haven't talked a lot about it so far, equity is a big deal. I think Congress has finally recognized that we've used the highway program in this country to build infrastructure for people who already had a lot of assets. And much of that infrastructure has hurt people who don't have a lot of assets. And so another change of direction this time is that this money needs to look at that factor as you spend it. Are you helping people who are otherwise underserved? I mentioned that rail's been a big deal for me. I've been involved in a group that helped advocate for increased rail funding. $100 and some billion is, like I said, a 750% increase. It's an amazing amount more than rail has ever thought about having. In this case, it's not just for Amtrak, but it's also for intercity passenger rail and for infrastructure. The Amtrak portion, oh, okay, here's the line itself, how big that line is. And then the Amtrak portion, again, we've underfunded passenger rail, especially intercity passenger rail, for a long time. And this bill gives Amtrak finally the assets it needs to reestablish that. The blue lines are for the Northeast Corridor. So while the Northeast Corridor is going to get a lot more money than it got previously, so is everything else. So be aware that in this region that could, we hope, translate into restoration of passenger rail from Portland to Salt Lake, maybe even further. And like I said, this is a quick overview. It's a lot of information. I've tried to, in this, give you the places that you can go dig deeper. It's a big deal. If we use it well, we can make a difference. If we don't, we can also make a difference. But maybe not in the way we'd like. So I urge you all to stay involved and use it well, and happy to take questions. So the question is whether it's all administered through the state transportation agencies. What I was trying to say in this is that about 2/3 of it still is. Previously, almost all of the money was administered by state DOTs. In this case, they've held back a fair amount of that money at US DOT, and it's going directly to communities from US DOT. So the Safe Streets for All program, the RAISE program, the INFRA program are all administered by US DOT. Safe Routes to School, Transportation Alternatives, the highway safety money is all administered by state DOTs. So it's a mix of, but there's much more money that's flowing directly from US DOT directly to communities than used to be.
Is it possible for communities to use, particularly the Safe Streets program, but any of the funding for improving their data collection and the ability to have data?
Thank you. So the question is any of this money available for data collection or improving data collection? And in fact, yes, there's a specific data collection program, and I don't have one of the sheets in front of me, but there's 200 million, I think, available nationwide just for data collection. But each of these programs has a measurement evaluation requirement. And so you can build data collection into your application if you're interested and if you're willing to, do that.
So my question is, can cities and agencies, can they stitch together different grants to get a project? For example, if I have a rural school, I get a safe route to school and use the rural grant, kind of together to get a larger project as one pack.
You can, it makes it more, so the question is, can you stitch together different programs to make this work? So the premise behind the new law is that there will be partnerships. And so it's certainly encouraged and expected that you'll stitch together partnerships between agencies. So you might have a school district and a city and a nonprofit and perhaps a highway district or a hospital or, that's very much expected. It's a little bit more difficult to stitch programs together. So say you get a Safe Routes grant for one portion of a project and a rural communities grant for another portion. It's possible. The thing that would make that more likely would be to have a good plan. And in that good plan, then you can identify, okay, this part of it really is eligible for Safe Routes money. This isn't, but it still complements this, and we could go after this money for that. The other thing that USDOT has done for the first time, and they're working to do more of it, is have a common application. So if you apply for a RAISE grant, it's the same application as the infra grant, and there's one other, and I can't remember what it is. They're working to do that with the smaller grant programs, but with the three big ones, they already have. So if I apply for a raise and I don't get it, they'll automatically look at it, talk to our FHWA office, our State Department, which they which aren't. One more question.
The decision on how that's portioned was made by our board. The board was.
Sorry. I stole that from somebody else, so I don't know which board, but the bill itself was put together by a bipartisan group from both the House and the Senate. So it was probably the board of one of the committees in Congress, would be my guess. I don't know the exact answer. We had one more.
Can nonprofits also apply for these grants, or are they only eligible?
Can nonprofits apply? In some cases, yes. So Safe Routes to School, TAP are eligible for nonprofits. Some nonprofit can be a partner with an agency. It takes either a local government or somebody else. So, I can't speak directly to which ones, but in all cases, because it really is looked at as a partnership thing, having a nonprofit as part of the application always is a strength for that application, no matter who it comes from. Anything else? All right. We made it.
Okay, that was a lot of information. I see everybody's little gears turning, so I'm excited to hear about all the grant applications people are going to apply for. Okay, we're going to take a break for lunch. So the dining room, for those of you who'd like to stay, you are all welcome to stay for lunch. If you want to go out these doors, go left, and you'll see the sign in the hallway that says dining room. Please grab some lunch. We will meet back here at 1 o'clock for Tim Keene, who's the City of Boise's planning director. So we'll see you all back at 1 o'clock. Question? Oh, Elaine, Safe Routes Group? Oh, yeah.
So if you're one of the Safe Routes to School groups, we'll go to the dining room too, and we'll only have half an hour for lunch, and then we'll retire to WW 54, where we'll have our Safe Routes presentation.